This is a story about how creativity in its purest form can deliver amazing business results.
I think what this paper does is it shows that those imaginative leaps that we all kind of fear to a degree actually do remarkable things, because they create fame, and fame typically drives awareness and goodwill and effectiveness.
Cadbury Dairy Milk is an institution in the UK, so it's a brand that's bought by 90% of UK households. It's something that people consume from cradle to grave and has a real place in people's hearts. So in 2007, Cadbury Dairy Milk was essentially treading water.
Signs of age were just starting to creep in, so sales were starting to flatline, having previously been in growth.
Cadbury had realised that Cadbury Dairy Milk had effectively lost a generation of consumers, so some people preferred Galaxy, a younger generation. We'd also suffered a big product recall due to the Salmonella incident that happened in 2006.
Then there were some slightly worrying signs in a kind of retail space where there was an over-reliance on promotion and a big pressure on price.
So it really was a brand and a business that needed a jolt to get momentum back in, to get the business results moving forward.
There was quite a traditional approach to marketing, it's fair to say. If you look at chocolate advertising in this country and actually around the world, there tends to be quite a formula.
Like the swirly chocolate shop, the breaking of the bar, showing people consuming the product in certain situations, which is all relevant and true, but it just made a lot of the advertising campaigns seem very similar.
The weaknesses of that model, even though it was good at familiarity, was that it wasn't very good at building fame, because it was predicated on an ongoing, comforting, familiar conversation. And the view of the new marketing team at Cadbury when they came in was, I think, that it was time to challenge that model and to see whether there was something more powerful they could do to leverage the brand. The two key pillars of the new model were fame and love. So fame, critically important for an impulse market where if someone's walking past a chocolate aisle, you want Cadbury to jump into their head more than anything else. And love, this is a brand that was one of the nation's favourite brands, but had just become a little bit forgotten and a little bit taken for granted.
We were given 2 weeks to pitch, which of course I always tell people is too short, but actually does lend urgency and excitement to the process. Frankly, the brief was fantastic because it didn't labour the point. It just said this brand should be loved and isn't. Its communications should feel like a simple moment of joy, just like the bar itself. And I remember Juan Cabral, who wrote and directed Gorilla, stopped them at that point and said, "Don't say anything else. If your brief is to make some content that is a little moment of joy in people's lives, like your chocolate bar is, I can do that."
And the idea was to behave like a production company, so glass and a half full productions was the thought, and that was really about Cadbury going from being makers of chocolate to being purveyors of joy, so acting like a Disney, like a Pixar, and making bits of content that just put a smile on your face. And obviously the first example of that was Gorilla, and the way that worked, I remember them talking about the logic of the idea, and then somebody pressed a button on a CD player, cue the opening strains of Phil Collins in the Air Tonight, and I remember sitting there just feeling an amazing feeling, thinking this is incredible, and turning to Lee Ralston, who was working with me on the brand, and just looking at each other with this big smile on our face like two kids going, "That's amazing, isn't it?" And I think really from that moment on we just had a real belief and conviction that it would have been criminal if the UK public hadn't seen that, because we just thought it would be an amazing film and achieve the objective of making people smile. So once we had, as the brand team bought the idea, we then had the probably unenviable task of convincing other people in the organisation that it was the right thing to do. And if you take a step back and just think about what we were trying to sell, so it was an ad that was 3 times longer than a normal ad. It had no chocolate in it, and it didn't really have an explicit message. And so when we shared the idea with senior stakeholders, their first response was to look at us and think, "Sorry, are you mad?" And what really happened over a 6-month period was we, through sheer tenacity, just kept going back and used lots of different things to convince people that it was the right thing to do. So drawing on a lot of more academic evidence around neuroscience, around things like low involvement processing. So a lot of the thinking about how different ways that consumers react.
Research methodologies reflect the beliefs of the research companies behind them, and commercial like this challenges a lot of those orthodoxies. Gorilla went into 4 rounds of pre-testing, so it wasn't done on a whim. It went through 2 rounds of qualitative pre-testing, 2 rounds of quantitative pre-testing, and the question that the client asked at every term was, do people like it and do they know it's from Cadbury?
For what was really clear was just how engaging this ad was going to be, to the point that Millward Brown actually said they needed to reset the scale on the interest trace because it literally went off the scale. So that really confirmed that this would be incredibly engaging. Where it was more problematic was around how well branded the ad is, and I think the way the questions around that are, people are asked, to what extent could this be an ad for any other brand? And logically, you'd say, well, it could be. But what that didn't factor in was just the sheer engagement and cut-through that it would have. So in a research environment, it has scored a very low branding score. When it came to the reality, it actually got the highest ever branded recall of an ad, 96% of people. So I think it just demonstrated that as you move advertising models forward, you have to make sure that the research models move with it, and it's not a kind of pass-fail. It's about interpreting the results and using judgment to go with it.